in an organization sexual harassers are punished, we have a zero tolerance policy, and the punishments include anything up to and including termination. What do you think we see with the incidence of sexual harassment? It's at the bottom. What is the good news for your organization? What is the good news for the consortium when it comes to this particular topic?
Zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance. And can you get fired from the consortium if you're found guilty of sexual harassment?
Yes.
You absolutely can. There have been people in these workshops over the years. I look them in the eye as we're talking about these different topics, and they're nodding with me. And then they go out in the workplace and they sexually harass coworkers. I can tell you, and I'm very proud to work with this organization, I can tell you Dr. Guajardo doesn't tolerate that kind of nonsense. Absolute zero tolerance. Absolute zero tolerance. The disciplinary outcomes include suspension all the way up through termination. So I can tell you, anybody says, hey Charlie, what happens to sexual harassers in the consortium? You get fired. You get terminated. And let's have a round of applause for that. So the good news is you work for an organization that doesn't tolerate sexual harassment. You don't have to worry when you come to work in the morning that you're going to be the target of sexual harassment. And it stems from the top. It stems from Dr. Guajardo's commitment to zero tolerance, and she backs it up with action. People are terminated. We have, I'll give you a second example. At my university, Indiana University Northwest in Gary, we have a relatively new chancellor. He's been with us for about 3 years. One of his first official acts as chancellor was to uphold the termination of a tenured faculty member for sexually harassing students. He took over as chancellor. The case was pending. The recommendation from HR was termination. And I thought, well, he's a new guy. He's not going to want to alienate the faculty by firing someone who has tenure. But to his credit, he's courageous just as your boss is. He came in and said, I don't tolerate this nonsense. You are terminated. So the word throughout the whole campus is, the big boss doesn't tolerate this, and if you pull off any of this nonsense, you engage in any of these prohibited behaviors, you won't work here anymore, even if you're a tenured professor. So I'm very pleased to have our new chancellor, Dr. Ken Iwama, and I'm always pleased to talk about sexual harassment here at the consortium because I know Dr. Kathy does not tolerate it. Here's a question for you, and it's updated. The statistics are updated. In the last year, from 2021 to 2022, nationwide, do you think we've seen an increase or a decrease in sexual harassment complaints? Sadly, for the first year in many years, we saw an increase of 11%. So a double-digit increase in 1 year. So while you can feel confident you're not going to be victimized by sexual harassment here at the consortium, the same is not true in other organizations. I have a recent case that I brought along, and I'm going to read excerpts from it, an organization very similar to yours. So let me take a moment and share this case that was settled with the EEOC. The Rural Office of Community Services, Inc., a Wagner, South Dakota-based social service agency which serves low-income families and individuals across multiple locations in South Dakota, will pay $320,000 in monetary relief to a class of affected employees. The agreement resolves a charge filed with the EEOC alleging that Rural Office of Community Services, Inc. discriminated against employees because of their sex by subjecting them to sexual harassment and retaliation when they filed complaints. The harasser in this particular instance was the executive director. The executive director. Employees complained. Nothing was done to address the problem. Instead, the people complaining were fired. This went on for years until finally the complainant said, you know what, we're not getting any justice within our organization. We're going to take this to the EEOC. The EEOC investigated and hammered them. $320,000, and they said, you must train people, supervisors and employees, annually. It's one of the reasons, as Dr. Kathy said, it's one of the reasons we're here today. The packet in front of you was approved by the EEOC a few years ago for use in a settlement with a local company. We don't have time in the short period available to me on the agenda to talk about everything in the packet, but what I am going to ask you to do, especially those that have not seen this before, I'm going to ask that over the course of the morning you take a few moments and scan through the packet, and I'll be available at the break, at lunch, and after the program to answer individual questions. I'm going to simplify things. There's a lot of information in the packet. Again, it's an EEOC approved packet, so there are topics that have to be included. I'm going to simplify it. I'm going to simplify everything by saying there are 3 simple rules. 3 rules. If you follow these rules, you'll stay out of trouble. If you don't follow these rules, you will, in all likelihood, be terminated from the consortium. And let me talk about termination for a moment before we talk about the 3 rules. If you get terminated from an organization for sexual harassment, how easy is it to find another job? What do you put on your next employment application as the reason you left your former employer? What do you put? If you put the truth, who's going to hire you? I was fired because I sexually harassed somebody at the consortium. Nobody's going to hire you. What if you lie on the application? What if you lie? In virtually all organizations, if you falsify an employment application and the company finds out about it, that's grounds for immediate termination. So you're not just shooting yourself in the foot, you're shooting yourself in the head. It isn't going to be easy to find another job. With social media these days, companies can check very quickly and find out, have you been involved in sexual harassment cases previously? And if you have, and you lied on your employment application, it's an immediate termination. So my advice to everybody in the workplace in the United States is abide by 3 simple rules. And the simple rules have been in place for a long time. Those who've gone through this before, do you remember any one of the 3 Simple rules. In unison? Anybody? Okay. We might need a remedial training session on, let's go for Saturday morning, like 6 o'clock, remedial training. Yeah, yeah. I'll be there. Who else will be there? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Keep sex and any kind of legal sex out of the work.
Okay, here's a young lady who knows how to find information in a handout packet and read. How about a round of applause? Yes. Yes, and ma'am, belt out, what page is that on?
17.
17, on page 17. 3 simple rules. A lot of information in the packet. It distills down to 3 simple rules. As the young lady just said, rule number 1, keep sex out of the workplace. If anything to do with sex is brought into the workplace, you bring it into the workplace, you run the risk of offending someone else in the workplace, and they can go to HR and file a complaint. So rule number 1, if it's sexual in nature, keep it out of the workplace. You have a calendar, you have a picture, you have a sculpture, you have a book. If it's sexual in nature, it shouldn't be in the workplace. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Any questions about that? If it's sexual in nature, keep it out of the workplace. Ma'am, you did such a good job reading. What's rule number 2?
No physical touch except for first aid.
Okay? In other words, keep your hands off of adults in the workplace. And do you think the EEOC and the courts care if you say, oh, you know what, where I'm from, we do a lot of touching and hugging?
No.
Do you think that flies with the EEOC?
No.
Absolutely not. This is the United States. We abide by the laws of the United States, and if you touch people in the workplace, you run the risk of somebody taking offense at the touch and filing a complaint. I'm going to give you an example, and this is from a police department. You'd think they'd know better. I've worked in 41 cases as an expert witness, and this is one of them from Broward County, Florida, at the courthouse. The lieutenant in charge of the police detail guarding the courthouse, every day, according to the complaint, there was a young lady who operated the metal detector when you go into the courthouse. Every day before the courthouse opened, the lieutenant would make the rounds at all of the doors, and he would go to the metal detector, and he would adjust the name tag on her chest. Okay? So he's touching her. Is he breaking rule number 2? Absolutely. If her name tag is crooked, what should he have done? Say, ma'am, your name tag is a little crooked today. Could you straighten it out? He went and put his hands on her chest, and she alleged in her complaint that while he was fumbling around with a name tag, he also groped her. He did this every day at the beginning of the shift. There were multiple witnesses who saw him put his hands on her chest and he was fumbling around. She files a complaint. And let me ask this question. Once she filed a complaint of sexual harassment, what should the police department have done with that lieutenant? He should have been suspended with pay or reassigned to ensure that that objective or that offensive behavior stopped immediately. Okay? That's what they should have done. The lieutenant was a big shot. They let him right where he was, and he went by every day after the complaint was filed, fumbled around on her chest, and leaned in and whispered, "You will pay for this." How do you think that case went when a jury heard it?
I think she made a lot of money.
She made a lot of money. Juries are very sympathetic. He shouldn't have had his hands anywhere near her body, shouldn't have been touching her. He should have been separated, but he continued to come and touch her, and also retaliated by telling her, "When this is all over, you will pay." The simplest thing, number 2, keep your hands off of people. All right? Unless there's a healthcare emergency. All right? Otherwise, I don't care where you're from. The courts don't care where you're from. The touchy-feely stuff we don't do in the workplace. If you insist, it is inevitable. It's inevitable there will be a complaint filed against you. So keep your hands off of people in the workplace. That's simple rule number 2. And ma'am, let's go 3 for 3. What's our third rule? Real simple. No profanity. No profanity. Is this in your policies and procedures, your handbook? Absolutely. You're not supposed to be using profanity at the consortium to begin with. If you do use profanity in the workplace, you run the risk of somebody filing a complaint against you and potentially a lawsuit. If it's sexualized profanity, the B word, the F word, they can file a sexual harassment complaint, hostile environment, sexual harassment complaint. I come to work and I have to listen to this nastiness all day long in my workplace. That's illegal. Sexualized profanity. If you use profanity that might be offensive to someone who is religious, for example, and I will quote from some of the cases, "God damn it," "go to hell," might those be offensive to a person who's very religious? They absolutely could be. Could they file a complaint against you for religious harassment? They absolutely could, and they would win. So our third simple rule, at the end of the day, reading all of the cases, all of the guidelines, the third simple rule is don't use profanity in the workplace. If it's sexual in nature, number 1, don't bring it to work. Keep your hands off of people in the workplace. And whatever you do, don't use profanity. How's that going to look in front of the children anyways? It's why it's in your handbook. You're not supposed to be doing these kinds of things according to your policies and procedures. Even if you didn't have those policies and procedures, I'd still have the same 3 rules. If you follow those rules, you'll stay out of trouble. If you don't, you're on a course to termination. And again, it's sad over the years when we made these presentations, there will be people sitting in the room and I'm looking around, making eye contact with people as I'm talking. They're nodding, they got it, and then within a year, they're doing the same things we talked about in this session that they shouldn't be doing. I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. You're shooting yourself not in the foot, in the head. Job prospects going forward, if you're terminated for sexual harassment, are dismal at best. Again, the good news is you work for a company led by Dr. Guajardo, who has no tolerance for sexual harassment and has demonstrated that with multiple terminations in the 18 years that she's been here. How about a round of applause for Dr. Guajardo? Any general questions for me? I know I'm on a time schedule and I've got to turn it over to Dr. Phil. Rodney has a question.
So, and those numbers you're saying, you sure those numbers have always been that way, but the women are just reporting, it's just being reported more. They've always been the high numbers.
Well, it's a good question. Rodney's question are the high numbers because it's publicized more? That was the case years ago, but we've sort of saturated the airways. People know what sexual harassment is, and consequently are more likely to label it as illegal sexual harassment, more likely to file a complaint. But until this year, the 4 or 5 previous years, the number of complaints had been steadily going down. So when I saw the 2021 to 2022 figures, an increase of 11%, that was shocking to me. We haven't seen an increase like that in 20 years, and I don't know what to attribute that to. COVID. We're gonna blame everything on COVID. Okay, might as well.
We were home for 18 months. We weren't
Right.
in a workplace.
Well, even if you're, can you be sexually harassed if you're a remote worker? Absolutely. Absolutely. So I don't know what the reason is, but here's an important point. What percentage of the complaints filed with the EEOC are filed by men? Man, I got to take you with me everywhere. You got those answers, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, there you go. It fluctuates from year to year, but right around 15 or 16% are filed by men. So the overwhelming majority of the complaints are filed by women. Here's an interesting point about the men. The overwhelming, and the EEOC will not publish this, but I got this from an interview with one of the officials. The overwhelming number of complaints filed by men are filed against other men. So males are predominantly the perpetrators of sexual harassment against women and men in the workplace. Yeah, so good questions. Any other general questions? Again, I would ask you to look through the materials before the day is over. I'll be around at the break, I'll be around at lunch, I'll be around when the program is over if you have individual questions.